The fork shook in my hand as I watched my mother push the plate away without taking a single bite. 3 hours I spent making that chicken, picking the best herbs from the market, seasoning it perfectly. The steam was still rising from the food, but she didn't care. "It doesn't taste the same as before, Sarah," she said, her voice cold and dismissive. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my chest tighten, my breathing getting shallow. After everything I'd been through with my divorce 6 months ago, I thought the worst pain was behind me. I was dead wrong. I'm Sarah Mitchell, 33 years old, and I thought escaping my toxic marriage was the hardest thing I'd ever face. David, my ex-husband, was a successful businessman who treated me like garbage at home but acted like the perfect husband in public. When I finally got the courage to leave him, I expected my mother to support me. Instead, she chose his side. But standing in my Manhattan apartment kitchen, watching her reject my cooking without even trying it, I realized something much worse was happening. The rejection in her eyes wasn't new. I'd seen it my whole life, but I always made excuses for it. Always told myself I was imagining things. But now, with my heart pounding and my hands trembling, I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't about the chicken at all. "Maybe you should call Jennifer for her recipe," Mom continued, mentioning my sister-in-law with that warm, loving tone she never used with me. "She made the most delicious chicken last week. Even David said it was restaurant quality." Hearing my ex-husband's name made my blood boil. Of course she was still talking to him. Of course she was still praising Jennifer, my brother's perfect wife who could do nothing wrong in anyone's eyes. My mind raced back to all those family dinners where Mom gushed over Jennifer's store-bought desserts while barely looking at the homemade dishes I'd spent hours preparing. Christmas mornings where she complimented David's wine choices while ignoring the elaborate breakfasts I made from scratch. Every family gathering where I felt invisible, like I didn't matter at all. The pattern was so clear now, it made me sick. To my stomach. I gripped the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned white, trying to stay calm. But my whole body was shaking with anger and hurt. This wasn't just about food. This was about a lifetime of feeling like I wasn't good enough, like nothing I did would ever measure up to what other people could do. My throat burned with tears. I refused to let fall. "I think I should go," Mom said, already reaching for her coat like she couldn't wait to get away from me. The casual way she was leaving made my heart drop into my stomach. She was walking out on me again, just like she did during my divorce when I needed her most. While I was falling apart, discovering all of David's lies and manipulation, she was having lunch dates with him and Jennifer, choosing their side over mine. But as the door slammed shut and I stood alone in my kitchen, something clicked in my brain. Something dark and terrible that made my pulse race and my hands shake for a completely different reason. This wasn't just favoritism. This wasn't just my mother being difficult. There was something deliberate about the way she always chose other people over me. Something calculated and cruel that I'd been too hurt and desperate to see before. This realization hit me like lightning, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. If I was right about this, if there really was more to her behavior than simple preference, then my entire family had been lying to me my whole life. And I was about to discover just how deep those lies went. The silence in my apartment felt like it was crushing me. I stood there staring at the untouched chicken, my mind spinning with memories I'd tried so hard to forget. My hands were still shaking as I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through old photos, looking for proof of what I was starting to suspect. There it was. Last Thanksgiving. Jennifer holding a simple store-bought pie while my mother beamed at her like she'd just won a cooking competition. In the background, barely visible, was my homemade turkey with all the traditional sides I'd spent 2 days preparing. No one even looked at it. My stomach twisted as I remembered how invisible I felt that day. I kept scrolling, my heart pounding harder with each photo. Christmas dinner 2 years ago. Mom's arm around David, both of them laughing at something he said. I was cutting the Prime rib I'd cooked to perfection, but they weren't even paying attention. Jennifer was getting praised for bringing wine she'd picked up at the corner store. The same wine I'd suggested weeks earlier, but somehow when she brought it, it became genius. My breathing got faster as the pattern became crystal clear. Every single family event, every holiday, every gathering, it was always the same. People got the praise, the attention, the love. I got criticism or complete indifference. How had I been so blind for so long? I walked to my kitchen window and pressed my forehead against the cold glass. The winter streets of Manhattan looked as empty and hostile as I felt inside. But something was burning in my chest now, something stronger than hurt. It was anger, pure and hot, and it was giving me clarity I'd never had before. The worst part wasn't just the favoritism. It was how she'd turned everyone against me during my divorce. While I was discovering David's affairs, his emotional abuse, his financial manipulation, my mother was having coffee dates with him. She was listening to his sob stories about how difficult I was, how unreasonable, how I was making everything up. She chose to believe a man who had systematically destroyed my self-esteem over her own daughter. I grabbed my laptop and opened my email, searching for messages from that horrible time 6 months ago. There they were, all the times I'd reached out to my mother for support, begging her to understand what David was putting me through. Her responses were cold, dismissive, always suggesting I was overreacting or that I should try harder to make my marriage work. But I'd found out later she was getting a completely different story from David himself. My hands clenched into fists as I remembered the day I finally confronted her about it. She'd looked me straight in the eye and said David seemed like such a nice man, that maybe I was the problem. Those words had cut deeper than anything David had ever done to me. When your own mother doesn't believe you're worth defending, what does that say about your value as a person? But now, sitting in my apartment with the evidence of her lifelong pattern spread out in front of me, I started to see something even more disturbing. This wasn't just about her liking other people more than me. This was about her actively working to keep me down, to make sure I never felt secure or confident. Every criticism, every dismissal, every time she praised someone else for doing exactly what I'd done, it was all designed to keep me small. The realization made me feel sick and furious at the same time. My own mother had been sabotaging my self-worth my entire life, and I'd been too desperate for her approval to see it. I thought about all the times I'd questioned my own judgment, doubted my abilities, stayed in bad situations because I didn't think I deserved better. How much of that came from her constant message that I wasn't good enough? I stood up and walked to my bedroom, my mind racing. If she'd been doing this to me for 33 years, there had to be more evidence. There had to be other people who'd seen it, other situations where her behavior was too obvious to ignore. And suddenly, I knew exactly where to start looking. The thought of what I might find made my heart race with a mixture of terror and anticipation. Because if I was right about this, everything I thought I knew about my family was about to crumble. And I wasn't sure I was ready for what I might discover. My phone buzzed at 2 a.m, jolting me awake from another restless night. A weather alert flashed across the screen. Major blizzard warning, all of Manhattan shutting down for at least 3 days. I should have felt trapped, but instead, something inside me felt relief. No distractions, no work calls, no excuses to avoid the truth I was desperately trying to find. The snow was already piling up against my windows when I made coffee and sat down with my mother's old phone that she'd left behind earlier. She'd been complaining about it acting up, said she needed to get a new one, but forgot it on my counter in her rush to leave. I told myself I was just going to charge it for her, but my hands were shaking as I turned it on. I shouldn't have looked. I knew it was wrong. But after 33 years of feeling crazy, of questioning my own memories and reactions, I needed proof. The phone unlocked with her old passcode. My brother's birthday, of course. Never mine. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears as I opened her text messages. The first thread I clicked on made my blood run cold. Messages between my mother and Jennifer, going back months. Months of planning dinners, family gatherings, shopping trips, all without me. But it wasn't just the exclusion that made my stomach drop. It was the way they talked about me. Sarah seemed upset again yesterday, Jennifer had written just last week. She's so sensitive about everything. Maybe we should just stop inviting her to family things until she gets her act together. My mother's response made me feel like I was going to throw up. I think you're right. She's been difficult since the divorce. David warned me this might happen. She's just looking for attention. My hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped the phone. They were talking about me like I was a problem to be managed, not a person with real feelings. And they'd been doing it for months, maybe years. The snow outside was getting heavier, but I barely noticed. All I could focus on was the screen in front of me and the devastating conversation that was destroying everything I thought I knew about my family. I kept scrolling, my breathing getting more and more shallow with each message. There were discussions about which restaurants to go to without me, which movies to see, even plans for Jennifer's birthday party that I was deliberately excluded from. Every time I'd asked my mother about family events she claimed didn't exist, she'd been lying straight to my face. But the worst was yet to come. I found a group chat between my mother, Jennifer, and my brother Mark. The things they said about me made my chest feel like it was caving in. They called me dramatic, attention-seeking, jealous of Jennifer's success. My own brother, who I thought loved me, had written things that felt like knives to my heart. Sarah's always been jealous that Jennifer is a better cook, Mark had written. Maybe if she actually practiced instead of expecting praise for everything, she'd improve. The message was from 3 days ago. 3 days before my mother came to my apartment and rejected my carefully prepared meal without even tasting it. Ran to the bathroom and threw up, my whole body shaking with the force of it. This wasn't just favoritism or personality differences. This was a coordinated campaign to exclude me, to make me feel small and worthless. My own family had been working together behind my back to isolate me, and I'd been so desperate for their approval that I'd made it easy for them. The wind outside was howling now, rattling my windows like it was trying to break in. But I couldn't stop reading. I had to see how deep this went, how long they'd been doing this to me. What I found next made me sink to my knees on my bathroom floor, gasping for air like I was drowning. Messages from during my divorce. Jennifer sending my mother screenshots of my social media posts, laughing about how pathetic I looked. My mother sharing private conversations I'd had with her, things I'd told her in confidence when I was at my lowest point, turning them into jokes for Jennifer and Mark to laugh at. They'd made entertainment out of my pain. The snow was falling so hard now that I couldn't see the street below. Manhattan had disappeared into a white void, just like my understanding of my family had disappeared into something cold and empty. I was trapped in my apartment with the truth, and there was nowhere to run from it. But as I sat there on my bathroom floor, something strange started happening. The shock was wearing off, and underneath it was something else. Something that made my spine straighten and my jaw clench with determination. They thought I was weak. They thought I was pathetic and dramatic and would just take whatever they dished out forever. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed, because now I knew exactly who I was dealing with, and I was going to find out why they'd been doing this to me. The storm outside might last 3 days, but the storm I was about to bring into their lives was going to last much longer. The blizzard trapped me for 3 days, but by the time the snow stopped falling, I had a plan. My hands weren't shaking anymore when I picked up the phone to call my Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister who lived in Brooklyn. We'd barely spoken, in years, because my mother always said Carol was difficult and jealous. Now I wondered what the real story was. "Sarah, honey, what a surprise," Carol said when she answered, her voice warm in a way that reminded me how my mother used to sound when I was very little. "I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up after everything with David?" The genuine concern in her voice almost made me cry. When was the last time someone in my family had asked how I was doing and actually waited for an answer? "I'm okay, Aunt Carol. Actually, I wanted to ask you something. It might sound strange, but I need to know the truth about something." My heart was pounding as I prepared to cross a line I could never uncross. Has my mother always been different? With me, compared to Mark? The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Carol finally spoke, her voice was quiet and sad. "Oh, sweetheart. I've been waiting for this call for 20 years. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Your mother has always been complicated about you, Sarah, even when you were little. You were so smart, so independent. You asked questions, you thought for yourself. Your mother never knew how to handle that." Carol's words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for decades. "She was jealous of you, honey. Jealous of a little girl. It never made sense to me, but she couldn't stand that you were becoming everything she never was." The phone felt heavy in my hand. But Mark was easy. He went along with whatever she said, never challenged her, married exactly who she picked for him. Jennifer feeds your mother's ego, makes her feel important and wise. But you? Carol's voice got stronger. You were too much your own person. And instead of being proud of that, she decided to break it out of you. I had to sit down. My legs felt like they might give out. Did other people see this? Oh, honey, we all saw it. I tried to say something once when you were about 12, after that science fair where you won first place and she barely acknowledged it. She didn't speak to me for 2 years after that. Carol's voice cracked. I should have fought harder for you. I should have kept trying. I'm so sorry, Sarah. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from hurt. It was from rage. Pure, burning rage that my family had not only abused me emotionally for decades, but that other people knew and did nothing to stop it. What else do you know? During your divorce, she called me several times, bragging about how David came to her for advice, how he respected her opinion more than yours. She was proud that he chose to confide in her instead of you. She said it proved she was right about you being difficult. Carol's words hit me like physical blows. I told her she was being cruel, but she said you needed to learn that actions have consequences. I closed my eyes, trying not to scream. My own mother had been actively working against me during the worst period of my life, and she was proud of it. She'd enjoyed watching my marriage fall apart because it proved she was right about me being flawed. Has she always talked about me this way? Since you were in high school, maybe earlier. She used to call and complain about how you were too ambitious, too independent. When you got into that good college, she spent an hour on the phone telling me how you were getting too big for your britches. When you got your job in marketing, she said you thought you were better than everyone else. Carol was crying now. I kept thinking she'd grow out of it, that she'd realize what an amazing daughter she had, but it just got worse. The apartment felt too small again. I stood up and started pacing, my mind racing with this new information. It wasn't just recent. This had been going on my entire adult life, maybe longer. Every achievement, every moment of happiness, every success I'd had, she'd turned it into something negative, something to resent instead of celebrate. There's something else, Carol said quietly, about the money situation. My pacing stopped. What money situation? Your mother's been in financial trouble for about a year now. Bad investments, credit card debt. She's been borrowing money from Mark and Jennifer, but it's not enough. Carol's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Sarah, David's been helping her, paying her bills, giving her cash. That's why she's been so loyal to him. She can't afford to lose his support. The pieces clicked together in my mind like a horrible puzzle. My mother's sudden defense of David during our divorce. her insistence that I was making everything up, that he was a good man, her constant criticism of me while praising him. It wasn't about her genuine feelings, it was about money. She'd sold me out to my abusive ex-husband for financial security. "How long have you known this?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "I found out last month when Jennifer let it slip during a family dinner. She thought it was funny that David was still taking care of the family, even after you left him. Like he was the noble one and you were the ungrateful daughter who abandoned everyone." Carol's voice was full of disgust. "I wanted to call you right then, but I didn't know how to tell you." I hung up the phone and stood in my living room, staring out at the snow-covered streets of Manhattan. Everything made sense now. Every cruel comment, every dismissal, every time she chose other people over me. It all came down to control and money. She'd kept me emotionally dependent on her, approval while secretly resenting everything good about me. And when that wasn't enough, she'd literally sold my dignity to my ex-husband for cash. But knowing the truth was giving me something I'd never had before: power. Because now I understood exactly what I was dealing with, and I knew they had no idea I'd figured it out. They thought I was still the desperate, approval-seeking daughter who would take whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I couldn't sleep for the next 2 nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those text messages, heard Carol's words, felt the weight of 33 years of lies pressing down on my chest. By Thursday morning, I knew what I had to do. I had to see the financial records Carol mentioned. I had to know exactly how much my mother had sold me out for. My mother always kept her important papers in a filing cabinet in her home office. I'd helped her organize it years ago when she claimed she was getting forgetful. The irony wasn't lost on me now. She'd used my own helpfulness to show me where she kept her secrets. My hands were sweating as I drove through Queens to her house, knowing she'd be at her weekly bridge club until 5. The key was still under the same fake rock by her front door. As I let myself in, my heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. The house smelled like her lavender air freshener and disappointment. Family photos covered the mantel, but looking at them now, I noticed something I'd never seen before. In every single picture, Mark and Jennifer were in the center, smiling and perfect. I was always on the edges, sometimes partially cut off, like an afterthought. I walked straight to her office, my legs feeling weak but my resolve getting stronger with each step. The filing cabinet was locked, but I remembered she kept the key taped under her desk drawer. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the folders labeled banking and personal finance. What I found made my stomach turn inside out. Bank statements going back 18 months showing regular deposits from David's business account. $500 here, $1,000 there, sometimes more. The amounts varied, but they came every month like clockwork, even after our divorce was finalized. My ex-husband had been paying my mother's bills while she helped him destroy my reputation and mental health. But it got worse. I found receipts for dinners at expensive restaurants. Dinners where David had taken my mother and Jennifer while I was struggling to afford groceries in my new apartment. Credit card statements showing purchases for gifts, clothes, trips to the spa. All funded by the man who had spent 2 years telling me I was worthless, who had cheated on me repeatedly, who had made me feel like I was losing my mind. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely turn the pages. There were even email printouts between my mother and David, discussing my emotional problems and how they needed to manage me during the divorce. She had given him ammunition to use against me in court, shared private conversations had provided him with intimate details about my mental state that he'd used to paint me as unstable. I found the smoking gun in a folder labeled legal, copies of correspondence between David's lawyer and my mother, thanking her for her helpful testimony about my erratic behavior and unrealistic expectations. She had testified against me. Her own daughter, she had sat in a lawyer's office and told them I was the problem, that David was a good man who deserved better than someone like me. The room started spinning. I had to grip the desk to keep from falling over. She hadn't just taken his side. She had actively helped him try to destroy me in court. If my lawyer hadn't been so good, if I hadn't documented David's abuse so thoroughly, I could have lost everything because of her betrayal. And she'd done it all for money. I heard the sound of a car in the driveway, and panic shot through my entire body. She was home early. My mother was coming back, and I was sitting in her office with evidence of her betrayal spread out in front of me. I could hear her keys jingling at the front door as I frantically tried to put everything back the way I'd found it. "Sarah?" Her voice echoed through the house, surprised but not suspicious yet. "What are you doing here?" I closed the filing cabinet and locked it, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might explode. By the time she appeared in the doorway of her office, I was standing by the window, trying to look casual while my whole body shook with adrenaline and rage. "I came by to return your phone," I said, my voice somehow steady despite the chaos inside me. "You left it at my apartment." She looked at me strangely, like she was trying to read my expression. "You could have called first." I did call. No one answered. The lie came easily, but I could see suspicion growing in her eyes. She knew something was different about me. I could feel her studying my face, looking for cracks in my composure. "Well, thank you for bringing it by." She moved toward her desk, her eyes scanning the surface like she was checking to see if anything had been disturbed. "I was just at Bridge Club with the ladies. We were talking about Jennifer's promotion at work. She's doing so well." Even now, even when I knew the truth about everything, she couldn't help herself. She had to praise Jennifer, had to make sure I knew other people were more successful, more worthy of celebration. The comment that would have destroyed me a week ago now just fueled the fire burning in my chest. "That's wonderful," I said, my voice flat. I watched her face carefully, saw the flicker of confusion when I didn't react the way she expected. She was used to me flinching, used to me deflating when she praised other people. My lack of reaction was throwing her off balance. As I walked toward the door, she called after me. "Sarah, is everything all right? You seem different." I turned back to look at her, this woman who had given birth to me and then spent 33 years systematically trying to break my spirit. She looked smaller somehow, older and more fragile than I remembered, but I felt no pity for her. Not anymore. "I'm fine, Mom. Better than I've been in years, actually." The confusion in her eyes deepened, but I didn't explain. I walked out of that house knowing I held all the cards now. I had evidence of her betrayal, proof of her lies, documentation of exactly how much she'd sold me out for. The question was, what was I going to do with it? As I drove back to Manhattan, my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Family dinner Sunday at your mom's. Hope you can make it." The fake sweetness in her message made me want to throw my phone out the window. But instead, I found myself smiling for the first time in days because I was absolutely going to make it. And it was going to be a dinner none of them would ever forget. Sunday arrived like a storm I'd been preparing for all week. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, putting on lipstick with hands that were perfectly steady for the first time in months. The woman looking back at me wasn't the broken, desperate daughter who had begged for scraps of approval. She was someone else entirely. Someone who knew exactly what she was walking into and had a plan. I arrived at my mother's house at exactly 6 o'clock, carrying a homemade apple pie that smelled incredible. The same recipe I'd been perfecting for years, the one she'd never once complimented. But today wasn't about getting her approval. Today was about something much more important. "Sarah." Jennifer's voice was sickeningly sweet as she opened the "Doors, you look different. New haircut?" She was fishing for something to criticize, I could tell. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, looking for flaws she could mention later in her group chat with my mother and brother. Something like that, I said, walking past her into the living room where my family was gathered. My mother was arranging flowers that Jennifer had brought, cooing over them like they were made of gold. Mark was opening wine, probably something expensive that David had recommended. The perfect little family circle that I'd never quite fit into, but now I knew why I'd never fit. It wasn't because I was flawed or difficult or too sensitive. It was because they'd deliberately kept me on the outside, and I'd been too desperate for their love to see it clearly. "Mom, I brought dessert," I said, setting the pie on her kitchen counter. She glanced at it with that familiar look of mild disapproval, the one I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Oh, you didn't have to do that, sweetheart. Jennifer already brought a beautiful cake from that French bakery downtown." The dismissal was automatic, reflexive. She couldn't help herself. Even when I brought something she used to love, she had to make sure I knew someone else had done better. "That's okay," I said calmly. "I made it for me anyway." The comment hung in the air like a challenge. My mother's eyebrows raised slightly. Jennifer stopped arranging napkins. Mark paused with the wine bottle halfway to his glass. They weren't used to me being indifferent to their rejection. They were used to me trying harder, apologizing, making excuses for taking up space. We sat down for dinner, and the conversation flowed exactly like it always did. Jennifer talked about her job promotion while everyone listened like she was delivering the State of the Union. Mark shared stories about his recent vacation while my mother hung on every word. When they asked me about my work as a marketing consultant, I could see them barely listening, just waiting for their turn to talk again. But something had shifted in the dynamic. I wasn't desperately trying to join in anymore. I wasn't fighting for attention or approval. I was just watching them, studying the patterns I'd finally learned to see clearly. And my calm observation was making them nervous. "You're quiet tonight. Sarah," my mother said during a lull in Jennifer's monologue about her yoga class. "Is everything all right?" "Actually, Mom, I wanted to talk to you about something." I reached into my purse and pulled out copies of the bank statements I'd found. In her office, the papers rustled in the sudden silence as I placed them on the table next to her dinner plate. I found these interesting financial records. The color drained from her face instantly. Jennifer's fork clattered against her plate. Mark stopped, chewing, and stared at me like I'd just pulled out a bomb. The air in the room became thick and suffocating. "Sarah, what are you doing?" my mother whispered, her voice shaking as she recognized the papers. "I'm having an honest conversation for the first time in my life." My voice was steady, calm, but loud enough for everyone to hear clearly. "I know David's been paying your bills, Mom. I know you testified against me to his lawyers. I know about all the family events you've been excluding me from while pretending they didn't exist." Jennifer opened her mouth to say something, but I held up my hand to stop her. I wasn't finished. "I also know about the group chat where you all make fun of me, where you call me dramatic and attention-seeking and discuss how to manage me like I'm a problem to be solved." I looked directly at my brother, who had gone completely pale. "I read every message, Mark, every cruel joke, every plan to exclude me." My mother was breathing heavily now, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "How did you— Those were private. Nothing about my life has been private to any of you. You've shared my personal conversations, turned my pain into entertainment, and sold information about me to my abuser for money." I stood up from the table, my chair scraping against the floor. "But that ends today." The silence in the room was deafening. Jennifer was staring at her hands, probably calculating how much of their scheme I'd uncovered. Mark looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. My mother was shaking, tears starting to form in her eyes, but I felt nothing for her distress. Not after what she'd put me through. I'm done begging for approval from people who have been working against me my entire life. I'm done making excuses for your behavior and questioning my own sanity. I picked up my purse, leaving the financial records on the table like evidence at a crime scene. From now on, if you want me in your life, you'll treat me with respect. Basic human decency. Nothing more, nothing less. I walked toward the door, my heart pounding but my steps confident. Behind me, I could hear my mother starting to cry, Jennifer whispering frantically to Mark. But I didn't look back. "Sarah, wait," my mother called out, her voice breaking. "Please, we can talk about this, we can work it out." I stopped at the door and turned around one last time. "No, Mom, we can't work this out, because working it out would require you to admit what you've done, and we both know you're not capable of that." I looked at each of them, memorizing their faces in this moment of truth. When you're ready to take responsibility for your actions and treat me like I matter, you know where to find me. Until then, stay away from me. I walked out into the cool evening air, leaving behind 33 years of manipulation, abuse, and desperate attempts to earn love that was never going to come. My phone was already buzzing with frantic calls and texts, but I turned it off and drove home in perfect silence. For the first time in my entire life, I felt completely free. 8 months had passed since that dinner from hell, and I was standing in my kitchen preparing Christmas Eve dinner for people who actually wanted to be there. My hands moved confidently as I seasoned the roast, no longer shaking with the need for approval. The woman who used to desperately cook for people who wouldn't even taste her food was gone. In her place was someone who knew exactly what she was worth. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first month after confronting my family was brutal. My mother called every day, crying and begging me to forgive her. Jennifer sent long text messages claiming I'd misunderstood everything. Mark tried to play the middle ground, saying we were all just having a big misunderstanding, but I held firm. I'd finally seen the truth, and there was no going back to the lies. Then something beautiful started happening. Without the constant drain of trying to win over people who were determined to reject me, I had energy for other things. I threw myself into work and landed 3 major clients. I started taking cooking classes in Little Italy, not to prove anything to anyone, but because I genuinely loved creating beautiful food. I began dating a history professor named James, who thought my independence was attractive instead of threatening. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Can't wait for tonight. Should I bring anything?" I smiled as I typed back, "Just yourself." It felt amazing to have someone ask what they could contribute instead of showing up empty-handed and expecting to be praised for their mere presence. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find my cooking teacher, Maria, holding a bottle of wine and grinning. She was a 70-year-old Italian woman who had become more of a mother figure to me in 6 months than my actual mother had been in 33 years. Behind her was James, carrying flowers he'd picked out himself, and my work colleague Rachel with her husband. "Something smells incredible in here," Maria said, kissing my cheeks. "You've been practicing what I taught you about the herbs, yes?" "Every day?" I laughed. Leading them into the living room, I decorated exactly how I wanted it. No expensive items chosen to impress people. No neutral colors picked to avoid offending anyone. Just warm reds and golds that made me happy. Plants I'd learned to keep alive. Books scattered everywhere because I actually read them. As my guests settled in with drinks and conversation that flowed naturally, I realized how different this felt from every family gathering I'd ever attended. No one was competing for attention. No one was making subtle digs disguised as jokes. People were genuinely interested in each other's lives and opinions. This was what normal relationships looked like. The evening was perfect until my doorman called up. "Ms. Mitchell, you have a visitor downstairs. Says she's your mother?" My stomach clenched instinctively, the old fear and anxiety trying to resurface. But I took a deep breath and felt my newfound strength kick in. "Send her up," I told him. James looked at me with concern. I'd told him some of what my family had put me through, but I squeezed his hand reassuringly. "It's okay. I can handle this now." When my mother appeared at my door, she looked older and more fragile than I remembered. Her eyes were red from crying, her expensive outfit wrinkled like she'd been sitting in her car for hours working up the courage to come upstairs. But I felt no urge to comfort her or make this easier for her. "Sarah, please. It's Christmas Eve. Can we talk?" Her voice was small and broken. Behind her makeup, I could see genuine desperation. The financial support from David had apparently stopped. I'd heard through Carol that he'd remarried and his new wife didn't approve of his continued involvement with his ex-wife's family. "You can talk. I'll listen." I didn't invite her in. My guests could hear everything from the living room, but I didn't care. This woman had spent decades humiliating me in front of people. If she wanted forgiveness, she could earn it honestly. "I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible mistakes. But you're my daughter and I love you and I miss you so much." The tears were real, but I'd seen her cry before when she wanted something. "Please, can't we just put this behind us? Family should forgive each other." "Do you know why you hurt me?" I asked quietly. "Can you tell me specifically what you did wrong?" She faltered, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She couldn't do it. Even now, even after losing me completely, she couldn't admit to the systematic emotional abuse, the financial betrayal, the years of deliberate exclusion and manipulation. She could cry and claim to love me, but she couldn't take responsibility for her actions. I wasn't perfect. I made some bad choices during your divorce, but I was just trying to help everyone get along. The same excuses, the same refusal to acknowledge reality. Can't you just forgive me? It's Christmas. Mom, you sold me out to my abusive ex-husband for money. You helped him try to destroy me in court. You spent decades excluding me from family events while pretending they didn't exist. You made fun of my pain with Jennifer and Mark. My voice stayed calm and steady. Until you can admit what you actually did and take responsibility for it, there's nothing to forgive. Her face crumpled as she realized I wasn't going to give in. But you're all I have left. David stopped helping me. Jennifer barely talks to me anymore. Mark says I need to fix this myself. So that's what this was about. Not genuine remorse, but desperation because her other sources of support had dried up. I'm sorry you're lonely, Mom, but that's not my responsibility to fix. I started to close the door. When you're ready to have an honest conversation about what you've done, we can talk. Until then, I have people here who actually care about me. I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, my heart racing but my resolve unshaken. When I walked back into the living room, my friends looked at me with concern and admiration. They'd heard everything, and instead of judging me for being harsh with my mother, they understood why I had to protect myself. "You did the right thing," Maria said firmly. "Toxic people don't change unless they face real consequences. Even mothers." We finished our dinner surrounded by laughter and genuine connection. As midnight approached and my guests started to leave, I felt a contentment I'd never experienced before. I was celebrating Christmas with people who valued me, respected me, and wanted to be in my life. No one was there out of obligation or for what they could get from me. James stayed to help me clean up, and as we worked together in comfortable silence, I realized how far I'd come. 8 months ago, I was a broken woman desperately trying to win approval from people who were actively working against me. Now, I was someone who knew her worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. My apartment was quiet as I finally went to bed, but it wasn't the lonely silence I used to fear. It was the peaceful quiet of someone who had finally learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. I had people who cared about me, work that fulfilled me, and most importantly, I had myself back. The snow falling outside my window looked different now. Not like a cold, isolating barrier, but like a fresh start covering the old world and making everything clean again. I'd spent 33 years trying to earn love that was never going to come freely. Now I was surrounded by love that came, easily, naturally, from people who saw my worth without me having to prove it every single day. And that, I realized as I drifted off to sleep, was the greatest gift I could have given myself.